Hello friends, 26 November 2015, India celebrated the Constitution Day for the first time. And 2025 is we mark the 10th anniversary of the Constitution Day. So it was started to celebrate the 125th anniversary of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, to honor him as the chairman of the drafting committee and to honor his role in the making of the Indian Constitution, and also to promote awareness about the Constitution's values, principles. We thought at AIM that we should make a video with that objective in mind. So to take us through the process of making of the Indian Constitution, we have with us the president of AIM USA, Milind. Welcome, Milind.
Thank you, Gaurav. This is a very important topic and I appreciate you taking it up.
So I know that this is a complex topic and the constitution making process was not easy. Obviously, it was a very tedious process and it took a lot of time. So I believe it took about 2 years, 11 months and 18 days to complete the process of constitution making. So can you maybe simplify it for us and take us through what happened? But before that, why don't you tell us what was the background?
Sure. I mean, the constitution making process, as you said, rightly said, was a tedious process. It was a multiple iterative process involving a lot of capable heads and it had a background to it. So actually, the critical point when this whole journey started would be when the Labour government was elected in Britain in 1945. And that government they expressed a desire to form a constituent assembly in India so that the Indian political establishment can be handed power. And based on the constituent assembly's creation of the constitution, that was their idea. So accordingly, in 1946, they sent a cabinet mission to India just to actuate this idea of putting together a cabinet mission plan. Okay. The cabinet mission plan really was the one that defined or gave the framework for how the Constituent Assembly will be created. And the Constituent Assembly is the one then which actually worked on getting the Constitution done from the point it was formed. But the way it was formed is also interesting. The Constituent Assembly had 400 something members. And those members were not elected out of adult general franchise. They were elected from a limited franchise. During the time of the British, and all this was during the time of the British, the administration in India there was a central administration and there was provincial administration. So from the provincial administration, members to the cabinet, to the Constituent Assembly were elected by the elected representatives of those provinces. And the elected representatives of the provinces themselves were elected by a limited franchise. People, for example, who had a certain income or who had a certain level of education, only those people with their spouses could vote. So that is how the Constituent Assembly was formed, not through a general election or through a general mandate, but through a limited mandate. Okay. So that is the point when the Constituent Assembly came into existence, and from then onwards, it's a very interesting journey how it marched on from there to the actually creation and adoption of the Indian Constitution as we see it today.
Okay, so you mentioned of the Constituent Assembly, right? So I believe the different members were elected, like you said. So how was Babasaheb elected into the Constituent Assembly?
That journey is even more interesting. So we are talking of 1946, all this action about forming the Constituent Assembly. A few years back, Babasaheb had written a book what Gandhi and Congress have done to the untouchables, in which he had been very explicit in sharing his views and thoughts about how Congress and Mahatma Gandhi had been inimical to the depressed class, the scheduled castes. And this attracted a lot of animosity from the Congress folks. So as a result of which, when the Constituent Assembly was being formed, Babasaheb was not given an opportunity to join the Constituent Assembly because his natural constituency was from Bombay at that time. And Congress was the dominant party in Bombay, in the Legislative Council. And they made sure that Babasaheb, Dr. Ambedkar will not be elected in the Constituent Assembly. As a matter of fact, there is a very famous statement that Sardar Patel made that we have not only closed the doors for Dr. Ambedkar, we have closed the windows and the ventilators. So yes, so they made it so airtight. But Babasaheb knew that to safeguard the interest of the scheduled castes and other underprivileged communities, his only option is to be part of the Constituent Assembly and influence the creation of the Constitution. So thankfully, Joginder Mandal, his associate from Bengal, was part of the same Scheduled Caste Federation party. He collaborated with him, and Joginder Mandal, with the help of scheduled caste members from Congress in the Bengal constituency, got Baba Sahib elected. So that is how he found himself in the Constituent Assembly when the doors and windows and ventilators were closed on him.
Yeah, that is definitely really interesting. So then, but how was the response from the Constituent Assembly or the Congress members who were part of the Constituent Assembly?
That question, the answer to that question is what shaped India's history. Because when Dr. Ambedkar joined the Constituent Assembly on December 13th, 1946, there was the first meeting to discuss the aims and objectives as proposed by Dr. Jawaharlal Nehru. The aims and objectives were just like how our constitution should be and what are the guiding principles for our constitution, which eventually became the preamble of the constitution. And on that day, towards the end of the day, Dr. Rajendra Prasad, who was the president of the Constituent Assembly, invoked Dr. Ambedkar to share his thoughts. Every member of the Constituent Assembly was asked to share their thoughts, and Baba Sahib Vatapani was actually surprised that I wasn't expecting to be called today, because I was under the impression that there were other 2023 folks before I would be called upon, which would be the next day. But nonetheless, he did share his thoughts, and the speech that he gave on that day is a historic speech. It changed the course of history for India, the destiny for India, not just the depressed classes or the scheduled caste at that time. The speech he gave won the hearts of the Congress and every member in the legislative, in the Constituent Assembly on that day. What Baba Sahib said in that speech, which is available on YouTube in its original narrative, original voice, that we are a group of warring factions, but I have no doubt in my mind that we all will be in unity at the end of our journey. I'm not worried about the ultimate, where we are all united, we are all homogeneous and united into one body. But my concern is about starting on that journey. So let us start on that journey where we all forget our differences and just keep the interest of the nation in mind. And that captivated the imagination and the appreciation of everybody in the Constituent Assembly. So the way his biographer Dhananjay Keer puts this, and I elaborate this point because it is very important for the history of India, is that the arms which were raised by the Congress folks, because of the background I gave earlier, to criticize Dr. Ambedkar and to somehow shun his efforts towards for being a part of Constituent Assembly, were raised into a large applaud and thumping of desks. The same hands which were there to teach him a lesson became that one speech turned the scales upside down. It completely changed the course of history, and that is how his entry into the Constituent Assembly was taken by the Congress and everybody for that matter.
Right. So they were probably expecting him to be bitter or go against whatever. I think there was Mr. Jaikar. He moved some motion about including the Muslim League, which was not present, I think, right?
Yes, that's another important point, and it really further buttresses the point I said earlier. Mr. Jaikar was a Congress person from Bombay, Barrister Jaikar. So when he was asked to share his opinion about the aims and objectives, he said that we should not have this discussion at this time because the Muslim League, led by Mr. Jinnah, had abandoned the Constituent Assembly and boycotted it because they were expecting the Britishers to say that partition is granted and you will have your own separate country. And in protest of not having made that announcement, he and his Muslim League had abandoned, they had boycotted the Constituent Assembly. And Barrister Jaikar expressed his thoughts that let us be lenient toward the Muslim League and try and convince them to join, and then we should have a discussion on the aims and objectives so that their thoughts and their inputs are also incorporated. The Congress people, the Congress whip, they shut down that idea. Nobody accepted it, and Barrister Jaikar, by the way, since that point never opened his mouth in the Constitution because he got so upset with the reaction he got. And Dr. Ambedkar, when he was asked to speak, he proposed the same point as Barrister Jaikar, but in his erudite and in his intellectual way and in his convincing manner, that the Congress accepted his point. Right. So that is the power of persuasion, that is the erudition of Dr. Ambedkar on display on that point.
Yeah, I believe I have seen that video on YouTube where he's saying that our problem is not with the beginning, the problem is with the ultimate. And he is expressing optimism that although, like you said, there were warring camps, and he was leader of another warring camp, but he expressed optimism that one day India will be united, India will become one, although there are different castes and creeds, they will all come together. And he expressed optimism again that Muslim League also will join at some point, right? They will also. I think that's impressed everybody in the Constituent Assembly, and because he sent a message of unity, everybody was happy. And like you said, he received a thunderous applause.
Till then, his impression was that he is only looking out for the interest of the scheduled castes, and to safeguard those interests, he is ready to sacrifice interest of everything else. Right. Through this one speech, he was like coming out as a true nationalist, that his interest was for the nation, for all the people of the nation, and the unity of the nation. And that was a surprise. But as a matter of fact, even in the roundtable conferences and in his other testimonies, he has always been for the nation. He has always been, but this was a image that kind of was perceived about him, and at times he had given reactions where such an image probably came into existence. But this one speech completely changed that image.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that happened, right? I believe then the aims and objectives were passed. I think let's call it the stage one, right, where they passed the objective resolution, aims and objectives, and then what happened after that?
Stage one, I would say, would be actually the formation of the Constituent Assembly. The Constituent Assembly itself coming into existence with Baba Sahib coming through his adventurous way, it was stage one. Okay. And once the Constituent Assembly was formed, now they were charged with the responsibility to create the Constitution. So how to go about that? So committees and subcommittees were formed to have focused group discussions on specific issues, on specific aspects of the Constitution. Okay. So there was the Union Powers Committee, there was the Minorities Rights Subcommittee, or there was the Fundamental Rights Subcommittee. So Baba Sahib was part of most of the important committees. Yeah, all these committees that I mentioned, besides the drafting committee which was formed later on, he was part of it. So all those subcommittees were formed to have focused discussion, and then those subcommittees would create their reports and submit to the Constituent Assembly, and from that point onwards they will be collated. So yeah, there would be further phases. So second phase would be formation of the committees and subcommittees.
Okay, formation of the committees and subcommittees. Like you said, they submitted their reports. Then where the reports were given to the Constituent Assembly, right? And then they discuss?
They discussed it, and they came up with their inputs, which were incorporated. Okay. And so this was again the initial stage of the Constitution. Then enters Mr. B.N. Rao, who was a bureaucrat, right, and a very able bureaucrat, because he had studied the Constitution of many countries, and he was very well versed with just the constitutional knowledge in general, how a constitution should look like, and so on and so forth. So he took all these inputs from the committees, subcommittees, the sanitized inputs which came from the Constituent Assembly once they reviewed those drafts, and then he collated all this material together in the form of a constitution, how a constitution should look like. So different committees, subcommittees, their reports were put together, sanitized, and so his contribution at this point at least, and he did that in a month's time, was to just put together all the rough material and put it into a constitution looking like draft.
And he structured it, compiled it in a constitution-like form, and I think he took inputs not just from reports, but I believe there was input coming from the Government of India Act 1935, which was already in place.
Very important point, because our constitution was being drafted, but it's not that till then the country was not having any constitution. So India was being administered based on the 1935 India Act, which was enacted or put in place in 1935. It was a result of long deliberations, a long journey, starting with the Southborough Commission, then the Salmon Commission, then the roundtable conferences, the four of them. And in all these different commissions and all these conferences, Dr. Baba Sahib Ambedkar had a huge role to play. His inputs were not only sought by the British when Southborough Commission, which was very early in the 20s, when Baba Sahib had just returned from England finishing his studies, and he gave a very huge report to them to share his thoughts on how the future constitution of India should look. At that time, he had suggested things like separate electorates and expanding the voting rights to not just limited franchise but adult franchise, and so on and so forth. So Dr. Ambedkar has a very strong presence or footprint in the 1935 India Act. And yes, the draft constitution that B.N. Rao created out of the subcommittees and committees inputs and the 1935 India Act was the draft constitution that was submitted to the drafting committee, of which Dr. Ambedkar was the chairman. So B.N. Rao took the existing constitution of 1935 Act, the new reports from committees and subcommittees, and compiled it together.
Okay, and Sir B.N. Rao was the constitutional advisor, right? He was not a member of the Constituent Assembly.
That is right. He was not a member of the Constituent Assembly. He was a constitutional advisor, and he was functioning in that role.
Right, and obviously he was a learned man, intellectual person, right? But like I said, he was a bureaucrat. So he submitted the material he created. Let's call it stage 3.
That would be stage 3, yes.
3. And then he submitted that to the drafting committee, which was chaired by Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar. So now let's say move on to stage 4.
Before that, if we want to take a interesting diversion, what happened in 1947, August 15, we all know, India got independence and the country was divided. So Dr. Ambedkar, who came into the Constituent Assembly from a seat in Bengal, from the province, the constituency from which he was elected, that the Khulna and the other places, excuse my memory, that went to Bangladesh, or that time is Pakistan. And because of which Dr. Ambedkar lost his seat in the Constituent Assembly. I mean, he had the option of being in the Constituent Assembly of Pakistan, because once Pakistan was formed, they had their own Constituent Assembly and everything. As a matter of fact, Joginder Mandal, who helped outside get into the Constituent Assembly, he became the first Law Minister of Pakistan.
Oh, really?
Yes. When Babasaheb lost his seat, again there was despair, and this happened around 14 July. That's when that whole partition thing came into effect. And that by that time, Babasaheb had established himself as not only indispensable but the most eligible, able person to be in charge of developing India's constitution. And everybody in the Constituent Assembly, cutting across political lines, cutting across social lines, had been convinced at that point. And this is sheer brilliance of Dr. Babasaheb Ambedkar, how he performed till then in the Constituent Assembly. And so when he lost his seat in the Constituent Assembly because of partition, Congress, who, like I said earlier, were his sworn enemy or sworn opponents, they took a very proactive and laudable step to get him back in the Constituent Assembly. Dr. Rajendra Prasad wrote a letter to the Prime Minister of then Bombay Assembly Presidency, Mr. B.G. Kher, to accommodate Dr. Ambedkar into the Constituent Assembly by asking one of their existing members, S.K. Patil, to step down.
Oh, really?
Yes, and that's how Babasaheb was brought back into the Constituent Assembly. And not only was brought back, at that time, he was down the line, in a very short time, he was made the chairman of the drafting committee.
Oh, okay. So drafting committee was in the plan, but the chairman was not decided at that time.
Right.
So obviously, but all the discussions had happened regarding the aspects of the constitution in the subcommittees, right? And then, okay, and then, like you said, this happened. Babasaheb comes back into the Constituent Assembly because obviously he made a really good impression on everybody. Okay, got it. Now the I was just trying to rephrase or just clear in my mind the chronology.
You're right. It's exactly like that. After he came back, the drafting committee was formed. And the drafting committee's job is really to take any inputs from as and when they come. And we'll come to the different stages and we'll know where the inputs came from. And to incorporate them and create a new draft. Means adjust the draft to a more sanitized one, to a more, after incorporating the inputs, to a latest one. So, we were at the drafting committee, B.N. Rao submitting his draft to the drafting committee, that was phase 3. Right? Now, when B.N. Rao submitted that draft, the drafting committee took a look at it. They enriched it. There were like B.N. Rao's, I don't remember the exact number of clauses and other artifacts, but the drafting committee increased it further by 1% or 2% by adding more stuff to it. And that is the phase 4, where a draft constitution was now ready in a very early phase. We are still far away from the final constitution. We presented to the President of India for discussion in the Constituent Assembly.
Okay. So they kind of scrutinized the text prepared by Dr. Sarbian Rao, made necessary enhancements, updates, and maybe they kept some of it as is, right? And I think you mentioned about Sarbian Rao's text had about, I think, 250-ish
Something like that.
articles, and Baba Sahib and the drafting committees was about 300.
Yes.
Little bit added. Yeah, maybe they did some modifications, and then it was presented to the president of the Constituent Assembly, that is Dr. Rajendra Prasad. Okay.
And then those were debated.
Yeah, before it went into debates, it was given to the public.
So that was public was okay. So then that constitution, which was enriched by the drafting committee, was shared with many stakeholders across the country.
Okay.
So the stakeholders were typically the provincial government, they were the princely states, they were the Supreme Court, High Court judges, they were even the general public.
Okay.
So it was just so that whatever the Constituent Assembly is coming up with is socialized and it is made available for everybody to review so that their thoughts and inputs also can be incorporated. So this happened sometime in March 1946. 48, sorry. Feb is when B.N. Rao gave it to. So Feb, March, around that time. 1948. And that thing went on till October of 1948, where everybody across the country was reviewing it, all different stakeholders. Their inputs were coming, those were being addressed in the drafting committee. And there was a separate committee actually, just to address all these inputs that was coming from various sources.
So about 8 months, that's a good enough time was given to the general public and, like you said, everybody, all the stakeholders to review it and then give their inputs, share their feedback.
So many times the devil is in the details. We think that the constitution was written by a few heads or it was influenced by a limited number of people. But actually the constitution has the will of the people in this form. Right. Where it was available to the general public, to many such stakeholders. And that input was also incorporated into the constitution. Through this medium. So this was stage 5, what we just discussed.
Okay. Yeah, it was open to public for inputs and suggestions, right? Okay.
And when those inputs from the public came, public meaning all the stakeholders, those inputs were added in the forms of amendments to the constitution that was shared with everyone, the constitution in phase 4. And that became a new draft. Again, this was done by the drafting committee. That new draft was again presented in the House, meaning in the Constituent Assembly, for debates. And the real constitutional debates, real meaning the meat of the crux of constitutional debates, were from this point onwards. That went on till almost 10 months. So we are talking of October 1948 till the next year, 49 September, somewhere around that time. And those debates are the ones which really shaped our constitution, because that time everybody got to apply their mind. But one thing stands out in that debate is Baba Sahib was at the forefront of every such debate. He was the one who was convincing everybody on how the constitution should be around those debates, around those amendments. And the way he presented it with so much of erudition, with so much of knowledge about 60 different countries' constitution that he was conversant with, that his word convinced everybody. I mean, everybody admitted that with that much of knowledge about constitution making and deep, detailed knowledge about every clause and every amendment that was being discussed, he had a huge role to play in those 10 months to make those amendments stick, or whatever the resolution of those amendments happened.
And from my reading, what I understand is when he presented the draft constitution to the Constituent Assembly, I think it was 4th November 1948. So he gave a landmark speech, right? And he explained in detail the salient aspects of the constitution. The important part which he said, I think for simplicity, I would club into 3 areas. One he told about is the form of the government as presented in the constitution. Second was the form of the constitution, right? And third were he addressed some of the allegations that were leveled against the criticism, right, against the constitution, right, which the drafting committee prepared. So we won't go into the detail, but he also in that speech he compared how our draft constitution has taken some of the drawbacks of other countries' constitution and
adopted it to suit our country's needs. which were our country's needs were very challenging. Like other countries that you typically think of have 2, 3 national languages. We had like 50 or so at that time, or probably more. Country was divided along many lines. So I will not go into the details, but writing India's constitution was a big challenge. How to weave this heterogeneous mass of people divided on so many lines into a common constitutional framework and constitutional law. So that is where the constitutional policies from other constitutions had to be amended and blended to meet our needs. Plus, at the same time, we had the benefit of hindsight. Those constitutions for all the other countries were in effect already for, if not centuries, decades, depending on which country we're talking of. So we could see the benefits and pros and cons of those constitutional provisions, and we could accordingly adjust to our needs because we had that benefit of hindsight. We were doing it afterwards, and that's where Baba Sahib addressed in that historic speech we are talking of November 4th, and he took on the criticism, which is very important because it was crucial at this point to reassure everybody in the Constituent Assembly and otherwise also that the criticism that was being leveled was uncalled for, unjust for, and unjust.
And I think it was related to there's nothing new in the constitution; it has just been copied.
That was one of the allegations that this is just a copy and paste of the India Act, and the rest of it is coming from the American and British Constitution. To which Baba Sahib gave an answer saying any constitution that we build today will be in some form or shape similar to the existing constitutions. You cannot just do something totally new. But to go as far as saying that it's a copy and paste is not right because India's needs are different, like I said earlier, with the diversity we had and other challenges. So it's definitely not a copy.
Yeah, and it's not a valid argument, I would say, because we just discussed, right? The different aspects were discussed by the different committees, right? If it had been just copy and paste, there was no need of form any committee, correct? So it's a whoever, I don't know who said that, but I don't think it's a valid argument, and Baba Sahib rightly justified it with whatever reasoning he gave.
Yes, I mean, probably there were some people who were his distractors even at that time within the Constituent Assembly. I know a few people who were so sworn to opposing Baba Sahib come whatever may, maybe because of his social background, the caste which he came from or whatever, they didn't want to see him attributed the glory that they saw coming his way eventually. So maybe that could be the reason. But there really nobody paid any real attention or attributed value to those criticisms.
Okay. And then, as you mentioned, the debates happened, right? The meat or the crux of the constitution making process was these debates, right? There, I think the assembly discussed every article, every clause in detail. And Baba Sahib, because he was representing the drafting committee, they were tasked of framing the constitution. He gave clear explanation, clear reasoning, right? Logical reasoning, factual reasoning with facts, where whatever amendments were moved, right? So I don't know how many. I know there are a lot of amendments tabled.
I may not have the exact count, but there were 7,000 plus that were tabled, and the ones that were ended up being moved were less than 3,000 or around that.
That's still a lot. I mean that also shows that how much involved the whole Constituent Assembly was in the constitution making process. Tabling 7,400 amendments. It's still it's a huge number. And then Baba Sahib discussing, I think you said close to 3,000, right? Because he had whatever amendments were suggested, he had to either counter them, accept them, discuss them. So he did all that. Right? It's an amazing feat that he achieved there.
It's a Herculean feat. And when people say either through emotion or through or through whatever source they have that Dr. Ambedkar wrote India's constitution or Dr. Ambedkar is the father of India's constitution, it is because he, for those 10 months, he defended the constitution, or whatever, he convinced the Constituent Assembly of what the constitution should look like. And in those 10 months, in those debates, he would put his point in such a way that even if somebody wants to oppose, you just cannot oppose because you make such a airtight case. So that is how we can attribute this constitution that we have, which is one of the best in the world, to Baba Sahib for those 10 months. I mean, and other things also, but I think the crux of it, in those 10 months, he debated so intelligently, so brilliantly, that even if somebody did not want a clause to be in a certain way or amendment to be applied in a certain way, they had no choice because logically he couldn't defend.
And I think he was not arrogant or adamant or for whatever he points he put forth, and it did not force anybody. It was logical, and it's not like that he rejected everything what others said. He accepted whatever felt reasonable, right, constitutional, and some of it obviously he rejected because, like I said, he gave proper reasoning. He did not reject anything without reasoning, and the members of the Constituent Assembly agreed to it. And then whatever he felt was constitutionally, he accepted it, I think.
That is another important aspect of the Constituent Assembly debates. They were not on partisan lines. They were on a very friendly, on a very harmonious way. The way those debates were conducted, the level of English, the level of etiquettes that were at display within members, even to oppose somebody's point of view or to negate somebody's thoughts. It was in such a harmonious way that you feel that those people really wanted to build something for the country, and they left their personal prejudices or their personal political affiliations outside the Constituent Assembly. And I was personally very impressed with the way they had the interaction. We don't see that kind of thing in today's political establishment.
I've read some of these debates, and you rightly said, and we really owe it to our forefathers, right? Whoever were participating there, our leaders, who came together across partisan lines. I think there were different left ideology, right ideology, center ideology, from different ideology. Everybody was there, but they kept that differences aside, and because they knew that they are framing a constitution which will decide the fate of India, independent India, right? They were very well aware of that. So that's really we owe to them.
Tribute to them. It's I mean, we should honor them for their commitment and dedication to rise above all these petty things and do something for the nation. Come together.
And I think they said for about total 165 sittings happened. Out of that, 114 were spent on discussing the draft, debating the draft constitution. Yeah, it's a Herculean feat. And when I think I've heard social media or somewhere that it took a lot of time to prepare the constitution unnecessarily. But I don't believe that argument, because I think some events happened in between that could have been one of the reasons.
So India's constitution is, like I said earlier, not a straightforward task. It's not just you are addressing human rights and civil rights, and you need to adopt to so much of dynamics within India, which is not applicable to most of the nations outside India. So to write a constitution for such a dynamic and diverse country itself is a big challenge. So you cannot compare the time it takes for writing constitution for Ireland, for example, or Australia. But more importantly, our neighboring country which got independence around the same time as we got, which is Pakistan, if you were to look at the amount of time they spent in getting their constitution finalized, then we were like at rocket speed. We had a much bigger challenge. Pakistan was divided on the basis of religion. So they didn't have the religious diversity as much as we did. They didn't have the linguistic diversity as much as we did, and so on and so forth. But the criticism that our constitution took time is unfounded. The whole Constituent Assembly did a splendid job. Baba Sahib probably stood rose over others and did a better job. But everyone in the Constituent Assembly delivered by giving us a great constitution, I would say in record time.
Yeah. And we have to also consider that during this period, partition happened. India got independence, right? But still, the work continued.
Yes. And partition was a big disruption. How much we try to, ignore it, it was a huge disruption. The Constituent Assembly itself lost its member when the partition happened, because some went to Pakistan. Then the whole focus shifted for the time being because of all the refugees coming in, all the violence that was going on as part of partition. So there was a real disruption around that time. So that had to be incorporated.
Was Mahatma Gandhi also assassinated during this?
Yes. Okay. He was assassinated before our constitution came into effect. Okay. So that was another big disruption. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So, yeah, I mean, there will always be critics for any good thing that happens. So, we should take the criticism towards why the constitution was delayed or whether it was delayed in that light.
Yeah, and as we discussed, right, 7,400 amendments. Right? So people were invested in the constitution. It's not a everybody put their minds in it. It's not a small number. 7,400 amendments being tabled. Absolutely. So obviously, if you are doing something good, it would take time.
Exactly. I mean, had we delivered a constitution, let's say a year earlier, just for the sake of argument, let's say, and had that constitution been something which was not as good, because we had to get it right on day one. We didn't have the luxury of putting something in place which was not efficient and then go through the motions of that inefficiency before it corrects itself. That would have been disaster. A new nation, when it comes into itself, find its feet on the ground, a new administration doesn't have room to self-correct. It has to start on the right foot.
Yeah. And one more stats just came into my mind. You mentioned about the constitution that was given to public for suggestions, right? So that there also, as I remember, about 3,500 suggestions were received from the general public, all the stakeholders, right? So, and that was also taken into consideration. So it's not just Constituent Assembly, General Public, Supreme Courts, Provincial Assembly. Everybody was invested. Everybody's inputs were taken into consideration.
So, though democracy came as a result of our constitution, the adult franchise, the universal voting came as part of our constitution, when the voting right was one man, one vote. But that principle was applied in the constitution formation, where the draft constitution was circulated and socialized with all the stakeholders. Their input sought, their input received, and then, so constitution making itself is a democratic process, what I'm trying to say.
Right, exactly. It is a democratic and constitutional. Itself is a constitutional process, I would say.
Exactly.
Right, and we talked about the different inputs. We talked about the different reports. We talked about the Government of India Act that was also taken into consideration. But I think there were some precedences also, apart from the reports like presented by the committees. From what I was reading, there were some notes also from K.T. Shah, B.N. Rao, and I think there were some other documents that were prepared by some other individuals that was also taken into consideration.
Yes. Also himself, Dr. Ambedkar had prepared a document called States and Minorities, which was a mini constitution with its own preamble. So, and he gave that before he lost his seat in the Constituent Assembly. And the point is that everybody's voice was heard. Everybody was empowered to share their thoughts either through notes or through memorandums or through drafts. And all that was taken into consideration in a right spirit, just so that no voice remains unheard within the Constituent Assembly. And everybody was empowered to have their thoughts, however divergent they might be from what the Constitution ended up being. But still there was room for those thoughts to be expressed and shared and considered.
Yeah. And I had a chance to read the text prepared by the constitutional advisor versus the constitution prepared by the drafting committee. So the first thing you'll notice is the preamble, right? So the democracy we have, the constitution we have, the soul of the constitution is in that preamble, which was prepared by the drafting committee, Baba Sahib's, under Baba Sahib's chairmanship. So that's a striking difference you will see
between the text. So the text that was handed to the drafting committee did not have that preamble.
No.
It had a preamble, but not as elaborate, which and has the soul of liberty, equality, fraternity. That is coming from
the drafting committee. So that's an important point to note. Because yes, the preamble is the soul of the constitution.
Exactly.
If the constitution today has to be tampered with or changed, it has to be done taking into consideration that the preamble does not get violated.
Right.
So that the preamble is the what do you want to call it? It's the guard. It's the it's basically safeguarding the constitution from any untoward changes. That's how I look at the preamble.
Exactly. From this discussion, I lost track of the stages we were into. So let's maybe recap that. So debates happened in which stage?
Debates happened. So the public received the constitution. Public meaning the stakeholders in phase 5. Phase 6 is when their suggestions and their inputs were incorporated. Phase 7 is when Babasaheb presented that historic speech November 4th to the Constituent Assembly. And then phase 8, I think, would be when the debates happen, and based on the debates, whatever the new draft came into existence, which was now more closer to the constitution we have today. And
The drafting committee took into consideration all the amendments that were moved, that were accepted by the Constituent Assembly, redrafted, resubmitted the draft to the Assembly. And I think there was discussion again, not substantive. Again, that whatever suggestion came from there, those were accepted, incorporated, resubmitted. 26 November 1949 is where it was formally accepted, right?
so that day also Dr. Ambedkar made a very historic speech.
Okay.
That speech is, the essence of that speech is, today we will get we have political democracy, but without social democracy, political democracy is of no use. And we have to make sure that as we march on our democracy, the political democracy, one man, one vote will come into play. But till we establish social and economic equilibrium, democracy, this one man, one vote will be of no use. And he gave a fantastic speech on that day when he presented the draft constitution. And that constitution was accepted on that day. That's why we celebrate November 26th as the constitution.
Okay.
And so it was a draft, now it was accepted. Now this draft has to be finalized, and so from November 26th till January 24th, that process continued. On January 24th, the actual physical document came into existence, with what was accepted on November 24th came into a formal document form, and all the Constituent Assembly members signed that on January 24th. So you might see a picture of Dr. Ambedkar signing the constitution. I think he was the first one because of his role. And on January 26th, it was brought into effect. That's why we celebrate January 26th as our Republic Day. And from that day onwards, our administration was given by the constitution.
Yeah, I remember some of the words. Now also you will see in a lot of speeches when people give about Babasaheb. He mentioned during the November 26th speech, or maybe before that, when the finalized version was being handed over, November 26th, right? One of the lines were that he thinks that the constitution is workable, and in future, if it doesn't work properly, so we cannot say that the constitution is bad. We said that man was wild. That's a historic statement.
That played out. That prophecy, that foresight actually played out, because constitution is an inanimate document. It has to be acted upon by somebody living, some human being.
Right.
If that human being who is acting on the constitution is dishonest, then having a great constitution is of no use. Whereas even if the constitution has flaws, because times change and certain things become out of time, obsolete, inapplicable at a later stage, but a person who is good, who is looking for the good of the society, will apply the constitutional provisions in such a way that the changing times will absorb any bad or side effects that it may have.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's a very important point to mention. Yes.
Exactly. Yeah.
Okay, well, it was an interesting discussion. Milind, thank you so much for sharing the insight.
I am so delighted to have this discussion, because this is a subject which not many people dwell into. And if people do discuss, they discuss it at a cursory level. But like I said earlier, devil is in the details, and there is so much details that never sees the light of day. So thank you so much for this opportunity.
Thank you.